Is this working? Yeah. Everyone, I think we're just going to start in 2 minutes. We'll just wait for a few more people to come into the room. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome here. Thank you so much for taking the time to come and join us today. I know that it's a really, really busy day today, this week, and so the fact that you've come to sit in this room and listen to this discussion topic is really means a lot to us. And I know there's also people joining us online. Sorry, I've been told to talk closer to the microphone. That's a lot better. Let's get started. My name is Melissa Pinfield, and I'm a senior partner at Meridian Institute. And I'm an executive director of the Just Rural Transition Initiative, which is housed at Meridian. And I'll be moderating today's discussion. Just to put you on notice that we really want this section to be quite interactive. We're trying to mix it up a bit because it's 90 minutes. So we need to sort of break it up into different segments. But also we want to open it up to Q&A because I've been to quite a lot of these panels over the last week, and I think it gets most interesting when we get questions from the audience. So putting our panelists and speakers on notice and putting the audience on notice, we'll also be taking Q&A from those who are watching and listening online. So the Just Rural Transition is supported by the UK Government, Foreign Common Development Office and Climate Works Foundation. We launched at the UN Climate Action Summit in 2019, and it's really focused on creating a global community of practice to try and focus on people-centered approaches to the transformation of food and land use systems. A lot of the work we've been doing with many of you here in the room and others is how do we really build the evidence and the knowledge of what works? How do we bring in diverse perspectives and approaches to really identify those opportunities and overcome some of the challenges of this people-centered approach to food systems transition. There are two main areas that we've been focused on in particular, organized around policy action and investment partnerships. Today's discussion, we're going to focus mainly on this role of policy action, although of course it relates very much to the topic of how we drive investment into food systems as well. In recent decades, you all know this, but public policies and support has really focused on increasing productivity and yields of a few staple crops. And to some extent, it's been extremely successful. Yields have risen by 2 to 3 times since 1950. But this success has come at a cost to climate stability and resilience, global biodiversity, and even food security itself. And in addition, these support measures have delivered little value for money in the way of helping farmers, many of whom continue to live in poverty and are themselves food insecure. There are really significant opportunities to repurpose existing policies and public support to deliver better outcomes for people, nature, and climate. There's a growing body of evidence, case studies that point to this, and growing interest from policymakers, food producers, agri-food businesses, civil society, and others in how to create more effective, better targeted incentives to drive these people-centered food systems transitions. And this is so critical because we face this polycrisis, which I think was listed as one of the terms of the year. We've got COVID impact still, conflict, climate change, and a cost of living crisis all really converging on top of all of those environmental and nature and biodiversity pressures that are building up as well. Public finance is under massive pressure everywhere, and many countries face significant debt burdens. So it's so important that public finance is directed in the most effective way to deliver multiple outcomes. The purpose of today's session is to really learn about some of the efforts that have been underway in the last 2 years to mobilize political and technical support to move forward with this repurposing agenda, and to ensure that this is grounded in inclusive dialogue with farmers and other stakeholders to ensure a just rural transition. Obviously, these policy options and support measures will look different in different countries. Each country has its own national context to contend with, and local factors as well. So to ensure success, policymakers really need to have careful planning based on data and evidence, and really need to have that solid political economy analysis, and need to ground what they do and start the process with inclusive consultations that have farmers at the table. In this event, we brought together perspectives from key stakeholders, from governments, farmers, businesses, and we're going to hear some of the latest academic evidence on this issue. So enough from me, that's some of the background context. And to speak more to the UK government role in driving this agenda forward, including under the COP26 presidency, I'm really thrilled to welcome our keynote speaker, Director of Energy, Climate and Environment at the UK's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, Debbie Palmer.
Thank you very much, Melissa. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's lovely to be with you all today in this first ever UNFCCC COP Food Systems Pavilion, which is a great milestone in and of itself. Today, of course, we're here to collectively forge ahead with measures to transform agriculture and food systems. And as we all know, this is one of the greatest challenges of our time. Melissa's already talked about the incredible rise in agricultural production over the last decades as yields have taken their upward trend in dazzling fashion. But of course we know this has come at a cost, driving climate change, driving extreme biodiversity loss, which threatens survival of the natural ecosystems that ironically we all depend upon. Indeed, the increasing fragility of food systems has been really very acutely exposed by the global crisis of food insecurity that we've seen unfolding across the globe this year, exacerbated by the illegal war in Ukraine, but laying bare the longer-term challenges of climate change and environmental destruction. So from my perspective and from the British government's perspective, there is an urgent need to accelerate a just transition to sustainable agriculture that can deliver for people, for climate, and for nature, that puts farmers at the centre of policies to build resilience, that protects livelihoods and supports a healthier planet to feed our growing population. Now, to get this started, shifting incentives will of course be absolutely key to driving transformation at scale. Governments have a really critical role to play. Globally, we know that governments spend over $800 billion annually in public support to agriculture. And we also know that much of this is inefficient, and it distorts the incentives, driving climate change and indeed environmental damage. The good news is we also know that there are alternatives. The evidence suggests that redirecting just 10% of public support to agriculture towards less harmful, more efficient and sustainable production and green innovation could deliver net gains of up to $2.4 trillion in 2040. Policy reform could help reduce emissions, restore biodiversity and deliver healthy diets for lasting food security. Now, of course, any reform process is complex. International cooperation needs to play a key role to support design and delivery of the shifts that are needed. Under the UK's COP presidency, we highlighted the global effort required to achieve this transformation. And we are really pleased to warmly welcome Egypt's COP27 presidency as they build on that momentum in this space. Going back a year, ahead of COP26, together with the World Bank and supported by the Just Rural Transition Initiative, back in 2021 we launched a peer-to-peer policy dialogue between governments on accelerating the transition to sustainable agriculture. The idea was, and I think it's proven to be the fact, that this provides a forum to catalyse policy leadership, share experience and mobilise collaboration. And in line with these efforts, in Glasgow last year at COP26, we launched a policy action agenda setting out guidelines, but non-prescriptive guidelines for policy measures to achieve transition to more sustainable agriculture. The Glasgow Leaders' Declaration on Forests and Land Use was endorsed by 145 countries. That commits to strengthen action on sustainable agriculture, redirecting agricultural policies where appropriate. And we've seen growing momentum in this space over the last year, which is something for us all, I think, to reflect on and celebrate. Through that policy dialogue, countries are continuing to build and share their experience, inspiring and mobilising others. And from initially 12 countries joining the dialogue, we've now got over 45 countries that have engaged. So we can feel there is a growing momentum in this space and a kind of positive forward action. This is framed around a set of success criteria for sustainable agriculture that delivers for people, for climate and for nature. So tomorrow on Agriculture and Adaptation Day, we will publish a chair's summary and a compendium of country briefs to highlight the action that lead countries are taking. Now, clearly, there's much more to be done, and farmers, in particular, need to be at the centre of efforts to redirect support. So I really welcome, I think it's really positive, the consultation process our partners from the Just Rural Transition Initiative have been conducting this year, capturing those really central voices from the field to reflect the farmer's perspective on how to design and to deliver policies that lead to sustainable agriculture. It's going to be absolutely critical. This is something we need to do together with all parts of the community engaged. So as we take forward the policy dialogue, we will endeavour from our side to ensure that we consistently reflect farmers' perspectives and what we're hearing from the people who deal with these issues every day. The strong set of recommendations that JRT has brought from the field, which I know we're going to hear about as we go through this session, I think will really be very helpful in that space and will give us a sense of how we move forward. So looking ahead, I really look forward to ongoing collaboration in three areas. First, to catalyse policy action through that policy dialogue process. Secondly, to support country efforts to design and implement those policy actions. And then thirdly, to facilitate multi-stakeholder partnerships through our work with the Just Rural Transition Initiative and our partnership with the World Bank, public-private partnerships facilitated through networks such as the Good Food Finance Network. All of this is important and it all needs to come together so that we've got a continued collaboration and communication across the piece as we learn from each other and go forward. So I look forward today to hearing from the diverse range of perspectives on these really crucial issues, to hear from the field, to hear from other experts, and to continued engagement as we all go forward. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you so much, Debbie, and really thank you to the UK government for, with the World Bank, really initiating this policy dialogue process. I remember it was in the lead up to the UN Climate Action Summit. There was first some, discussions, tentative discussions with countries on, would this be of interest? Is this something, we think there is appetite for? And to see this process really mature, develop, and bring more people into this conversation has been, really amazing. I think the interest that's come from governments has been far greater than what we anticipated when we set out on this process 3 years ago. Another element of the work that we're facilitating at the Just Rule Transition is a multi-stakeholder working group. And one of the joys of this working group is being able to listen and hear from some of the leading academic experts and authorities working on this issue. It's sort of a, if you like, a kind of a clearinghouse and information sharing and exchange between people who are working on these issues. So that those who want to come in and learn more about the space can kind of get smarter quicker, right, about what's already going on, not duplicate efforts, but build on what's happening and have really start to develop this kind of consistent narrative as well, and a nuanced narrative. I mean, we've been very careful about using the word repurposing. It's very different from the fossil fuel debate. You know, this is really about making sure we're investing, keeping this money and investing in the right things. So this has been a wonderful thing to kind of see evolve over the last couple of years. And I mention this because one of the key partners in this multi-stakeholder working group is the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. So next up, we are going to hear recorded remarks, because he can't be with us today, from Maximo Torero, who's the chief economist at the FAO. FAO is doing a lot of work to provide analytical support to countries through its MAFAT program. You may have heard of it. It stands for Monitoring and Analyzing Food and Agricultural Policies. And this is working in many countries in Africa to help strategically prioritize, reform, and implement policies on food and agriculture. So hopefully, fingers crossed, the technology is going to work. Let's see.
Dear colleagues, it's a pleasure to be with you today. I'm sorry I cannot be today in person, but I did not want to miss a chance to send a video message. So thank you so much to the organizers, who I know very well, Just Rule Transition, IFPRI, and the Food System Economic Commission, for this invitation. It is great to see so much interest with events dedicated to food and agriculture, really giving agri-food systems a seat at the COP27 table and the attention they urgently needed. In this session with you, I am happy to see a clear mission to accelerate action on the agri-food system transformation to make it more efficient and effective and sustainable, but especially on the importance of using repurposing of agricultural support to achieve this goal. Given the stepbacks in food security and nutrition and the economic, health and environmental challenges that the world is facing, making healthy diets more economically accessible for everyone is critical. To move towards this target, it is critical that we transform our agri-food systems. Global economic growth prospects for 2022 have been reversed downwards significantly, and this means less financial resources are available to invest in agri-food systems. However, the SOFI report shows that governments can achieve more with the same public resources. Governments are expending a significant amount of public resources to support food and agriculture. The different support measures being used can distort prices, trade, production, and consumption decisions. Worldwide, support to food and agriculture accounted for almost $630 billion per year on average between 2013 and 2018. Producers take the lion's part share of this support globally, about 70%, and about $111 billion were spent yearly by governments for the provision of general services to the sector, while food consumers only receive $72 billion on average every year. Most of the support producers get is through price incentive. This includes border measures on imports and exports, such as import tariffs, quotas, export taxes, bans, and licensing, and market price controls, administered prices at which governments procure food from farmers, or minimum producer price policies. Overall, support to agriculture production largely concentrates on staple foods, dairy, and other animal source protein-rich foods, especially in high and upper middle income countries. Rice, sugar, and meats of various types are the foods most incentivized worldwide, while producers of fruits and vegetables are less supported overall, even penalized in some low-income countries. And this is happening in a world where we have 3.1 billion people don't have access to healthy diets. So the SOFI 2022 report presents evidence that if governments repurpose their current resources they are using to incentivize the production, supply, and consumption of nutritious foods, they will contribute to making healthy diets less costly and more affordable, equitable for all. In addition, we also see improvements towards reducing hunger and extreme poverty. This is true in the 3 scenarios up to 2030, where we simulate all the countries in the world. First, to reallocate fiscal subsidies from producers to consumers to bridge gaps in healthy consumption patterns. Second, to reallocate fiscal subsidies among producers to bridge gaps in healthy consumption patterns. And third, to reallocate support through the border price incentives, border measures, and market price controls to bridge gaps in healthy consumption patterns. We find that with the same money, countries can unambiguously improve the affordability of healthy diets. However, we need to be careful as there could be trade-offs that could need to be considered and managed. As you can see from the table, green arrows represent positive gains on all three scenarios of repurposing lead to large gains in improving the affordability of healthy diets, the last column. They can also reduce undernourishment and extreme poverty. However, depending on the scenario, there could be trade-offs and negative outcomes from this repurposing in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, agricultural production levels, and farm income. The magnitude and direction of the trade-offs do vary by region and income group. So it is not the same for every country, as the results and solutions will be country and context specific. Now, I know what you are thinking. How do we do this then? In the multi-billion-dollar opportunity report that we work together with other agencies, we go into much more detail to empower countries and policymakers on the repurposing journey, which needs to be country-specific, as agricultural policy is very different in Colombia than in, say, Indonesia. But in a nutshell, and as closing takeaways, this involves first, to estimate support already provided and the impact it has. Second, to through an inclusive multi-stakeholder process, design the approach for repurposing agricultural producers' support and assess future impact. Third, to review and refine the strategy before implementation. And fourth, to closely monitor the outcomes, understanding the trade-offs, and measuring them carefully, so that we can implement the policies that will optimize our results. Colleagues, what is important is to understand what are the consequences of the actions we do. What is important is to use our scarce resources in the best efficient way. What is important is to have information on what are the trade-offs and how we can minimize those trade-offs, and how we can repurpose this support to benefit and to create the proper incentives so that we can achieve a world which is sustainable, but also at the same time an agri-food system that delivers the food that is needed for all and the healthy diets that we need to have access. Thank you very much, and again, apologize that I couldn't be with you today, and it has been a pleasure to be able to talk to you at least for 5 minutes. Thank you so much.
Great. A round of applause for Maximo. Great. We're going to hear from another expert now, David Laborde, who is a senior research fellow in the International Food Policy Research Institute, IFPRI, about some latest academic research that IFPRI is publishing. Thanks. Do you want to...
Thank you. Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. I will need my presentation. No? Would we? Okay, good. So I'm David Laborde from IFPRI, so the International Food Policy Research Institute. What I'm going to present this afternoon in the work we have done for and with the Food System Economic Commission, and in partnership with other researchers from Oxford University, to put a price tag on the hidden cost, but also the hidden gains. And that's what I think will disturb you a lot of existing policies. And then I will discuss about what is the kind of pathway for the future. Okay, so I'm going to start by pointing that we cannot go back in time. The policy that exists today have already shaped the world in a specific manner. Maybe it will have been better to not implement some of them, but they already exist. So in something I'm going to show you is what's happened if we eliminate them, and actually eliminating them will make the world a worse place. And then we are going to learn how we can make the world a better place. But in many cases, this discussion on repurposing can be highly confusing, and I'm going to try to explain them. So, David Laborde, it's me. Stephen Lord is my colleague from Oxford University, and you have the logo of the different organizations. So the first thing I want to make clear is the world has been increasingly integrated. And at the same time that we have produced much more food and feed per capita, so we have moved from more than basically 4,000 calories per capita 60 years ago to, no, don't look the years at the end. It's between 1960 and 2020. To more than 7,000 calories per capita at the world level. So a lot of these calories also feed cattle that will feed human, and we lost calories during the process. But basically, the world is producing more than enough calories to feed everyone. And this increase in production has been largely done, more than half, through innovation, through gain of what we call total factor productivity. And just on that, productivity should not be seen as a bad word. Productivity is a good word. It's about sustainable productivity, but at the end, productivity is what you get for what you use. Increase in productivity means more food by unit of land, more food by unit of water, more food by unit of carbon. The problem we had so far is that we were not considering all of that in some of our measures of productivity. But we will not get out of the situation we are now without more productivity. And that's what we have done in the past, but not enough, in particular not in inclusive. But at the same way, we have increased significantly the share of calories that is traded internationally. So about 10% 60 years ago to more than 25% currently. And it has been shaped also by trade policies and farm policies. And if you look at the map on the right, you will see region of the world that, in this case, in case of protein, in purple, import more protein than they import proteins, and basically consume more protein than they produce, and green area where you have exporters of proteins. And the key message here is that we cannot think about food system transformation or policy pathway thinking about autarky. It's not one country on its own that is going to fix first the global problems, but even any problem, because in many cases it's going just to shift the problem to the neighbor. Because we are connected, because people need to eat. So if tomorrow people produce less meat in Europe, it doesn't mean that Europeans are going to consume less meat. So the question is where this meat will come from. And as I've said, it is shaped by policies, and as Maximo Torero has shown before, we have two families of policies. We have the subsidies. You take money from the taxpayer, and you give it to farmers in different ways. And you have trade policies that basically create a difference between your market and the world market. In some cases, this policy helps farmers when you protect your farmers, so when you basically put an import tariffs. But in the global south today, you have a lot of policies that are actually taxing farmers. So many farmers in Africa do not even receive the world price, they receive less. So in this case, it hurts them, the current policy. But when you protect your market, you increase the price of your commodity. So if you're in Switzerland today, the price of meat is 3 times the world market. We remove the policy, it means the price of meat will go down. People will eat more meat. So we really have to think about all these policies have different effects on consumers and on producers. There is not a simple story here. And these policies impact the food system on these 4 pillars. How much we produce, and in the world of today, the more we produce, the more emission we have, so that's not a mystery here. So if you have a policy that pushes to produce more, you emit more. What you produce, what type of product? Are you doing green beans, sugar, or cattle? How you produce, that's the technology you use. And of course, also depending on the price incentive, the type of subsidies you have. If you have subsidies on research and development or subsidies on fertilizer, how you produce things can be very different. And last but not least, where to produce. Are you producing in Tanzania, in Brazil, or in Switzerland? And here also the story is not as simple as you can think. Because today, to produce 1 liter of milk in Ethiopia, you emit 16 times more CO2 than in Switzerland. So moving production from north to south can increase emission, put more pressure on some systems that have not enough water. Doesn't mean that we don't want to do this transition. It means that if you don't bring the technology in the south before, you have a problem. You know, you need to increase productivity in the south. You need to help farmers in the south to start to do this transition. But basically switching off the light in your bedroom is not going to light it in your kitchen or somewhere else. And at one point, that's the sensitive part, it will cost money. So, world is complex, just make it sure, and that's what we need to keep in mind. So here we are going to try to make it less complex, and we use models to basically compensate for the weakness of our brains. We are going to look at 3 scenarios quickly here. What's happened if we remove all type of supports, subsidies and tariffs, both in the north and in the global south. But let's be already clear, especially for this type of support, meaning subsidies. 95% of the subsidies in the world are given by OECD countries, plus China, plus India. So there is a lot of discussion about repurposing that, for example, for most countries in Africa, is largely irrelevant. You have people that are discussing how we can do better with the money we have, but for the country that doesn't have money, it means we don't are part of the discussion, we cannot benefit from it. So in the same way that I was saying, we need to, when we talk about repurposing, closing the productivity gap between the south and the north, at one point repurposing will also mean bringing money from the north to the south, because if you don't have money to repurpose, if you don't have policy, not only space, but action, what does it mean for you? You know? It's like you're outside of a restaurant, and now you are start to have a better menu, but you are still outside of the restaurant. So it can be good for the people in the restaurant, not for you. So we combine a large-scale, we combine a large-scale model that is a CGE that has been used in a couple of studies from the World Bank, in the UNDP, UNEP, FAO report, $1 billion opportunities, in the last SOFI report that Maximo has shown before, with a very detailed accounting of the various costs associated with food production. And that's the SPIQFS. And so that's what the work done by Stephen Lord at Oxford with a lot of details, and I will come back a bit on that. So you are going to see numbers. But as I've said, numbers can be attractive, they can make headline. But more important than number, we need to understand what this number means, where they come from, what are the mechanisms, because if you don't understand the mechanism, you will never be able to do the proper action. You know, a number is like the symptom, but the same symptom can be associated with different disease. The same number can be associated with different story. If you want to treat the disease, you need to understand why you get these numbers. And that's what I'm going to, and I hope I have already started to help a bit. But also we have some level of uncertainty. No? It's not like if we know, you know, how much emission each cow in Ethiopia emit. To be honest, we don't even know how many cows are in Ethiopia today. Same thing if you look in the US, we use in some case, you know, an average emission about how soybean is produced. But between various farms, various practices, you see large variation. And it's not like if we have all this data available. So uncertainty and has to be done if you want to be kind of accurate. So here in the example when we remove subsidies, you see map of additional costs coming from removing subsidies. And I use this one just to illustrate the type of cost we are looking at. So on one hand, when you produce, when you carry food, when you cut trees, you emit emissions. GHG emission, CO2. But one type of emission is the nitrogen emission. And I mean, depending on how familiar we are with the topic, they have a different life cycle. They have a different warming potential and life expectancy. So we are doing a specific treatment for them. Then you have the value of water. So where do you use this water, but also different places on Earth doesn't have the same water potential. So basically the cost of water is not the same. Then you have the land use, and here it's measured as ecosystem services. And finally, you have the social cost that we measure mainly with hunger and poverty. And all of this doesn't move in the same way. You know? You can basically cut your forest, have economic development, reducing poverty and food security, but still have more emission and lower ecosystem services. That's all the trade-off that also Maximo was referring to. And as you see on some of these maps, in many cases, first, you see that all these maps are not the same. So it means that even in terms of graduation, the different costs and the effect of policies will be different from one location to another. But if you look, for instance, at the blue one, in a number of cases, with the elimination of some of these policies, you see a reduction in livestock production, for instance, in the US or in Europe. But the main region that will produce more of this livestock will be Brazil, Argentina, Australia, Namibia. And so you are just shifting costs. And potentially, if per unit of meat, you emit more CO2 in Argentina than in the US, the net balance will be a global increase of emission. So, when you start to aggregate this map at the global level, what we really find is if tomorrow, like in the Marvel movie like Thanos, you say, okay, I'm deleting all the policies, we are going to have extra costs for the world. And depending on the scenario, especially the one where we remove everything, it's about a net value of $500 billion. And that's really coming from the fact that you are going to shift some production from China, from Europe, to Latin America, for instance, but also to Africa, to Southeast Asia, where productivity today is lower, where protection of forests today is still lower. And to give you an example, so I'm going to move from livestock now, for example, from corn. But if you lose 1 hectare of land of corn in the US, you need between 3 and 4 hectares to compensate in Africa. And the carbon value of land in many African countries is much higher than in the US. And in any case, a lot of the damage have already been done in the global north. You know, you are never going to recover the primary forests that were destroyed, and that has a very high value in terms of carbon. So, when you do then by instruments, you also get different things. And why we separate this instrument is trade policy is linked to trade negotiation. So it's very much more potentially politically sensitive. And trade policy doesn't really cost money for most governments. When subsidies, it's taxpayer money. But also, if you are a poor African countries, the only thing you do today is trade policy, because you don't have the money to do other type of farm policy. So you know what type of reform we want will be different. So here is just to say that this type of costs and social versus environmental are distributed differently. If you're on the left, you are least developed countries. If you are very on the high, you are high-income countries. And some of this reform can actually bring positive economic gains in the south, but today it's just going to shift some of the environmental costs. And this one is just about this question of uncertainty. The number I have shown you, so 500 billion, is in average. So basically, we have 50% chance to be above or below these numbers. Sorry, you have more like 80% chance to be at this level. But if you are very risk adverse, you can basically think that the cost can be higher or the cost can be lower, and especially when we look at the environmental cost of some of these policies. So, to conclude, as you have seen, we cannot do repurposing just one country at a time, even if it will be practically part of the process. We need to find a global agenda on that to make sure that things make sense and you are not just shifting deforestation somewhere else. For instance, then you have very different policies around the world. Not every country has the same policy mix today. Not every country has the same policy space today. Then, when you look at some number of this report, yes, a headline, you will see newspaper, oh, this costs 1 billion, or this costs 500 billion. Actually, it's not the really important thing. So for some policymakers, that can be a trigger. But understanding where the problem comes from is key if we want to find a solution. And the solution is going to take basically two shapes, as I've said. Reducing the productivity gap, and that will involve transferring resource from the north to the south. And that's going to be much more politically sensitive. But as you see also in the result I have shown is, during a long time the repurposing was, oh, the farmers are not going to like it, the political economy will not allow it. Here you saw also that removing policy, even from an environmental point of view, doesn't make sense. What you need is better policies, not no policies. So how we shape them are going to take different form, once again, in different places. So yes, productivity transfer, but reducing productivity gap, and with potentially transfer of resources that will be needed to make sure that everyone has something to repurpose and that everyone has a policy. And the last point I want to make, it's land use change. A lot of the environmental costs that you see here come from land use change. So if tomorrow also you say, oh, most of the forests in the world are protected, the picture will be very different. So if we are sure that Indonesia, Brazil, the DRC protect their forest and have the time, money, and political will to do it, some of these bad aspects will disappear. Thank you.
Thanks, David, so much. That's such rich information, and really delighted that we, Just Real Transition, are partnering with IFPRI and the Food Systems Economic Commission for today's event. I find this is kind of it really feels like an event of two halves, if you like. We've got this incredibly technically important analysis, this modeling, which gets to this issue of the trade-offs. This is the sort of technically detailed work that needs to be understood and translated and built on in every single country. And I think David said it, this has to make sense, right? So how do we make those trade-offs? So this is why I think it's so important that a big focus of the work is on the sort of the technical capacity building, this modeling ability, this analytical ability that needs to sit at the country level. An equally important element of this is how do we ground truth this in what's happening on the ground, the experience of farmers on the ground, what are their needs. And language like this, I suspect, isn't easily translated. So how are we finding the right language to have the right conversations in ways that farmers can engage and share their insights? So we're going to transition soon and start hearing some perspectives from farmers. But I'm going to share first a video that we did, which sort of really captures some of these voices from the field. And then we're going to have a fireside chat with Ishmael.
Farmers are on the front line when it comes to the challenges that are faced with climate change. Every year, the climate keeps changing. The rains keep getting shorter, and farmers are forced to produce even in that environment.
I've been in the field for 20 years and borne witness personally to megastorms that contribute saltwater incursion into our soils, warm winters that drive pest pressures up in subsequent seasons, invasive species, drought. It's challenging.
أولاً الزرع المباشر بديناه في المنطقة نظراً لتغير الظروف المناخية، يعني قلة التساقطات وحتى استنزاف التربة حتم علينا أن نعتمدوا على واحد التقنية اللي ما كيكونش فيها الحرث. هو أكيد أن التقنية ديال الزرع المباشر تحت لنا الفرصة باش نعتمدوا مجموعة تاع الزراعات وندخلوا دورة زراعية في المنطقة. هذه الدورة الزراعية اللي كتغني لنا التربة ديالنا بالأملاح من خلال تثبيت الأزوت في التربة.
Notre système d'élevage que nous prenons au niveau de mon organisation, la PES, c'est un système de production agro-pastorale qui ne fait pas de la grande transhumance et ce modèle d'élevage, à notre avis, permet effectivement de lutter contre le réchauffement climatique.
Silvopasture, which is the intentional integration of livestock and trees, performs a really key part of the business in terms of giving our cattle shelter and shade, depending on the time of year, enabling them to exhibit these kind of really natural behaviours like rubbing their heads and necks against the tree bark, but also from a nutritional benefit as well. So the cattle are able to eat the leaves and that gives them an amazing nutrient boost. And obviously just having trees in the system means that you get that immediate increase in biodiversity, but also the above ground carbon storage as well.
To make food systems equitable, resilient to nature and climate, it's important that we start with the farmers bottom up.
The revision of the nationally determined contribution, NDC, must involve farmers and ensure that farmer, cooperative, farmer organization, indigenous people organization must involve in development programs, nationally and internationally.
Start speaking to indigenous and peasant farmers the globe around, because with the resurgence of regenerative techniques that are some of our traditional foodways we still use today, without those being implemented and incorporated into an alternative system that's scalable and workable for those that will be there doing it, I feel like we're sleepwalking towards our own destruction.
If it is that we hope to achieve sustainable agriculture, any form of sustainable environment, and achieve food security, our youth and women have to be involved.
Don't make decisions for the farmer without the farmer. Make the decision with the farmer, not for the farmer. Let the farmer be at the table when the research is being done, when financing the areas is being discussed, when farmer organizations are being discussed, so that they also have their own input because they know where it pinches most.
Urgent action has to be taken for the welfare of the farming community, the consumers, and the future generation. Let's all come together to have a joint effort to make this planet a better future.
Great, so we're proud of that video. We filmed interviews with many of the farmers during the dialogues that we've been having over this year. So that's dialogues. We started off in Hungary at the World Farmers Organization General Assembly, South Africa, Morocco, and with Morocco's National Institute of Agricultural Research, and elsewhere. I'm probably forgetting one too. We've spoken to 100 individuals from 39 countries. So this is not a formal consultation. We're calling it practical perspectives. We've synthesized the findings and the key recommendations, the themes that came out through those discussions, and we're publishing that today. So you'll find that on our website. The QR codes are available around the room. So do find one and scan it and go to that. Please share these findings and recommendations. Please see if it's useful. You can integrate it. I think the message was really clear. Farmers should be at the table at every point. And so we're really delighted that here at COP we're starting to see more farmers present and vocal, but not enough. We need to get more farmers here in every single panel and dialogue that's talking about food systems transformation. So let's make that happen. And please share the video as well. If you can find it on our Just Rule Transition, follow us and whatever those social media people do share it. It's a lovely video with some good messages. Right, I know we promised Q&A, but given we're running a little bit behind, David, are you okay to join the Q&A later? So think up some tough questions for David, because I think he can handle it. And if you really are interested in also some of the sort of really technical and expert sort of working group discussions, do join our working group as well. So come and reach out to me or Sare or other members of the JRT team and find out how you can get involved in that. You get to speak directly to some of the authors of these reports and ask them challenging questions. And did you consider this? And why did you say that? So it's really, really good forum to kind of dig deeper into some of the analysis that's coming out. Okay, so we're going to make another transition. We're trying to keep it flowing. And I would now like to invite to join me in a discussion, in a chat, Ishmael Sunga. Lost your exact title. Ishmael Sunga is a great friend of the Just Rule Transition, and he's from SACAL, Southern African Confederation of, I've lost your title, Agricultural Unions, and representing 12 countries in Southern Africa. So we are going to dig into some of the recommendations and get your perspectives on the dialogue that we also had in South Africa, Budapest, and elsewhere. I think we've got a slide that just summarizes some of those, so I don't have to read them out. But briefly, can you see that? Farmers make clear we need to design policy with them, not for them. It's critical that policymakers tailor policy to the context. We need to rethink policies such as input subsidies. We need to incentivize landscape stewardship, and we need to significantly expand agricultural extension services. So, Ishmael, let's come and talk about your perspectives and what you learned. Are we on?
Hello? Is this loud enough? Is this loud enough? That's as far as my voice can go, unfortunately.
Is this where? Oh.
Hello? This is much better. Okay, thanks.
Do I have one too? Yes, excellent. Okay, so key takeaways from you from the dialogue that we had in Southern Africa and elsewhere, but maybe we can just pick off a couple of them, Ishmael, but design policies with farmers, not for farmers, tailor policy to the context. What are the messages that came out from the dialogues? What are your key takeaways?
Thanks for those questions. I think a couple of things. The debate on repurposing has essentially been driven not by the farmers themselves, but by other stakeholders, the development sector. So farmers have not been part of the conversations to a large extent, and yet it is about them. So I think that starting point already is a defective starting point. The second point really is that, as already alluded to earlier on, that subsidies can be politically sensitive and has got different interests playing out. And one would assume that the political sensitivity of the subject makes it very difficult to discuss openly. But surprisingly, one of the key outcomes and key takeaways of the meeting in Johannesburg in South Africa was that, maybe let me not start with the surprising thing. Let me confirm the correct thing first, that farmers love subsidies. That was very clear. There's no, and they want them to continue, by the way. So, but that's not the issue. The issue that was surprising was this: they are also very objective, very critical about the way that subsidies are being deployed for a good purpose, for a good heart. But there are serious deficiencies around many things about them. Perhaps you want to ask me further questions, I can elaborate.
What do they want to see?
What they want to see is subsidies that respond more to their pain points. It could be access to production inputs on time. Quite often they are distributed or delivered much later than when they are needed. And secondly, it's a one-size-fits-all. It is the same formula for the entirety of the country, which doesn't help. Thirdly, there's an issue about also targeting. There's also a fundamental problem is that we always classify smallholder farmers as homogeneous. So we think that everyone is a farmer to 100% degree. There are some who are not farmers in many ways. They farm to eat, and those that farm commercially. And we don't select when you're providing subsidies. Fourthly, subsidies alone are not the solution. There could be other complementary requirements that they should be given together with. For instance, if you buy seed alone, but there could be other inputs that will make the seed germinate better and grow better, that is also not provided. So one could really name them. They promote monocropping. Essentially, it is about the same crop. And they don't also promote a number of other requirements that are necessary for a sustainable and viable agriculture. Unwittingly, they may actually be contributing to the climate problem that we are facing at the moment.
Another one I can see up there is expand incentives for the private sector that drives socially responsible investment. We're going to hear from Thomas Lingard from Unilever soon. So just to put him on the spot and get him thinking, what do you think is the right, what role can the private sector play here, and how does that intersect with the sort of the public incentives also?
Much as near as you are to me now, I can't hear the question properly. The noise. Can you try again?
Role of the private sector in this.
The role of the private sector in the provisioning of subsidies. I suppose the small and medium enterprises in the rural areas might be the best solution to distributing them because they are closer to the populations that we are talking about. And as we know, the smallholder farming sector is geographically widely distributed, and centralizing the distribution of subsidies to vast areas that farmers reside or practice in is not going to be very helpful. It requires that maybe we need intermediary services that are so small enough to reach all the different corners of the country. That's the first point. The second point really is to understand what will be required in the different areas, and therefore tailor the provisioning by the private sector of subsidies that actually are talking to the different geographic specific areas that at which they are needed. Yeah.
So it's a really sort of consistent takeaway, isn't it? This tailoring, local context is important. So really having to understand deeply what's happening in different landscapes and tailor the policy. So this sort of blanket one-size-fits-all isn't really delivering what we need.
Yeah, there are good examples. It's not all bad, and there are also good examples. For instance, we heard that in Mauritius, there are subsidies that are being deployed to support organic farming, which is nature sensitive in that sense. We also heard of, in Morocco as an example, subsidies that are being deployed to support the mechanization of conservation agriculture. It's the second example. The third example is that there are subsidies that are actually being provided to develop a community of practice, a dairy platform in one of the West African countries. There are also subsidies that are being deployed to support the e-wallets, say, in Nigeria. So there could be clever ways of configuring subsidies such that they deliver at scale and they also deliver in a way that they are going to be much more impactful.
Great, and I think this idea of like showing what's working as well and shining a light, like you just said, there are places where it's working well, and so one of the things we try to do is develop these case studies to share learnings with others about what works. So I think Debbie mentioned, earlier that we'll be publishing some case studies from some countries tomorrow as part of the work through the COP26, the policy action dialogues. But also, these case studies that we're really hearing from the ground as well. So we want to do more of that. Again, if you have thoughts, if you have sort of examples of things that are, really deserve to get more attention, please also do get in touch with us. We'd love to kind of, profile things that are working well. I think that gives us this things to draw upon. So if you can stay on the stage, Ishmael, because we're going to do Q&A and people may want to also direct some questions to you. I'm going to invite up our panel members as well, and we're going to direct here's some more from Elizabeth Simadala, who is president of the East African Farmers Federation, Thomas Lingard, global head of sustainability at Unilever, and Enke Opperman, head of the Directorate of Decent Work, Worldwide Food and Nutrition Security, what a great title, at the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, BMZ. Elizabeth, let me start with you first. We've heard the academic evidence and analysis for repurposing policies and public support, and we've heard some of these key takeaways from the farmer dialogues. As a Ugandan young agripreneur and a smallholder farmer yourself, and past and current leader of many different farmer organizations in Africa, what are some of your experiences of government interventions in your region? What were the impacts? And how can we make these work better for smallholder farmers?
Yeah, thank you very much, Marisa. The question is a bit broad, but I'll try as much as possible to narrow it to our perspective. But I think to start with is just to know that government is the custodian of our policies. I think that is very critical. And then for the implementation of these policies and the investments that they attract, it is always dependent on the inclusiveness, on the proactiveness, on the investments, and on the leadership that our governments provide. Of course, it is usually, embedded in the role and the responsibilities of our governments. But when you read the joint sector reports from our different countries, they always show positive progress in terms of reporting on what is happening at country level as far as their targets within the Africa Union commitments are concerned. But we also need to understand that our governments are also under pressure. They're experiencing a lot of challenges, partly because of the public debt, because of climate change, conflicts, both internal conflicts, but also when you look at the Russia-Ukraine crisis, and also the pandemics like the COVID-19. So all these, of course, lead to, impact negatively on the performance of our governments. But overall, we've seen a lot of progress, except for a few countries that don't really report. Some of the successes we've seen are in countries like Rwanda that has really, regardless of these challenges, have met their targets. So, as a farmer and a farmer leader, what I would say is that our governments usually involve us. They include us in the discussions regarding policy, regarding some of the bilaterals that they sign on our behalf, regarding some of the public-private partnerships, but it's not enough. It's not enough. We need to be, brought on board in terms of numbers, but also in terms of the discussions that are always on the table. So what do I see as a challenge? So from our side, what I see as a challenge is that most of these investments, most of these policies, they don't really attract what I would call the sufficient investments that are required in the agriculture sector. And so you really see that there is sort of limited progress in terms of the agriculture sector. And because of the challenges that I also touched on previously, the COVID-19, the climate change and so forth, whatever progress that is reached is always watered down by those challenges. So what needs to be done, over and above is a public policy. It is very critical that we have a public policy. But also in terms of urgency, we really need to see investments in the agriculture sector and especially in safety nets. These, of course, will, move a step further to cushion the farmers who are the most vulnerable when it comes to climate change. But also, these investments, these safety nets, are going to increase agriculture production. And we know that once agriculture is supported, then it also has a direct benefit to other sectors, but also in terms of the GDP growth. Thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So speaking to some of those challenges that farmers are facing in this poly crisis and the need to kind of get the supportive, the role of government and the public policies that can be put in place. Thomas, I'm turning to you next. And really, we've seen private sector, we've seen companies and financial institutions as well also calling on this, calling on governments to really repurpose public support and incentives. So can you tell us a bit about, the private sector role in all of this? And, for Unilever, what are some of those challenges and opportunities that you're seeing? And for you, is this a sort of a, short-term response, or is this part of a longer-term strategy?
Oh, yeah. Is that 3 questions all at once? Thank you very much.
You can cope.
Well, thank you. Look, thanks very much for the invitation to be here. I'll start with a bit of a preamble on what it is we're trying to do as Unilever. And within our sustainability strategy, we've got climate goals. So we've got science-based emissions reduction goals right across our value chain. We've made commitments to protect and regenerate 1.5 million hectares of land, forest or ocean by 2030. And we've also made commitments to help empower smallholder farmers to protect and regenerate farm environments. And critically, we're trying to do all of that while remaining a profitable, growing business. And we were having a chat yesterday, and Melissa was saying, well, some people might ask, if you want all this stuff to be done in your value chain, why don't you just pay for it? And that last point is really critical, is that businesses can't put themselves at a huge competitive disadvantage by funding stuff that nobody else is doing. And so we think this has to be done collaboratively with farmers, with governments, to redesign the system. And if there are inefficient subsidies driving the wrong kind of behaviours against the goals that everybody is trying to deliver, the whole sustainable development agenda overall, then we should have a collective interest in reshaping those policy frameworks so that we're all pushing in the right direction. It doesn't mean, of course, that we're not investing. I thought I'd share with you, a few of the examples of the things that we are doing and that we think would have potential for greater scale if we could align the subsidies with the direction we want to go. So Hellmann's, our dressings business, has been working with over 400 soybean farmers in the US, 144,000 acres of land in Iowa, planting cover crops, driving sort of reduced soil erosion and improving water quality and decreasing GHG emissions. We've got projects with coconut sugar growers in Indonesia, 400 hectares on 1,000 farms for a local source, their Bango ketchup sauce, and that's making those farms more resilient to climate change, improving pest management, and having integrated fertiliser and water preservation projects. And then also in Côte d'Ivoire, a partnership supporting cocoa smallholders to gain land tenure, security of land tenure, because as we've talked about, if we don't have those things, we can't move. So they're examples of a very long spreadsheet of projects that my sustainable sourcing colleagues are running directly with farmers and with our suppliers to try and do this. But we are one company, and there's a number of companies doing great work, but it's not every company in the world that will stick their neck out and do this. And we really want to see the whole system aligned to bring everybody on this journey, and so that we can scale that. And we're not going to hit 1.5 degrees, and we're not going to solve the world's food crises if we don't get this done at scale.
Thanks, Thomas. Save up burning questions for Thomas on what he said there. But I think, big businesses like Unilever, let's get frank, you get access, into some senior people within governments, I'm sure, in many of the countries that Unilever is present. And I think, if I can also point, I know there's what we were hearing from the farmer dialogues is actually there's so much commonality of interest here in terms of the messaging and the ask. And that there's this powerful way, I think, that we can really bring together and amplify that message by, businesses like yours working with farmers. And I know tomorrow we have an op-ed coming out that Ishmael Sunga and Tony Shantinas from WBCSD really looking at. Where's this commonality of our agenda? We can be, this idea of working in partnership across different stakeholders. That's something that's such at the core of Just Rural Transition. So thank you for being part of that and that willingness to really put into action what it looks like to work in those multi-stakeholder partnerships. I'm going to turn to Anke. We started with the government perspective, and we're kind of coming back, at this stage with the government perspective. We thought that was good because we wanted to give you a chance to listen to, here's what we're hearing insights from the analysis. Here's what we're hearing from the insights from farmers. How can policymakers integrate some of this sort of, this technical analysis, this insights from the ground? How do you see that working in practice for policymakers?
Thank you very much, Melissa. And indeed, I'm very grateful that you gave me this insight, and I learned quite a lot from all that contributions. Thank you very much. Let me start by saying that Germany... Is it better now? Okay, thank you. Let me start by saying that Germany very much welcomes the increasing research, scientific evidence, and the activities of stakeholder communities on repurposing agricultural policies and support. And we will continue to support this as much as we can, since we really think that that is of utmost importance. For policymakers, these insights are incredibly valuable contribution to identify what forms of public support to phase out and where to redirect state support. Indeed, I learned a lot today from all the contributions. And to inform decision makers about politically viable, coherent and effective repurposing approaches, policymakers need to develop country and context-specific strategies. So I think also from our discussions today was very clear that we have to have a look from one land to the other and really assess the particular circumstances to learn more about this. And to do so, these insights must feed into evidence-based and inclusive consideration and negotiation processes. So I think this is really something which is on the agenda already since quite a few years, that we really have to have evidence-based policy decisions, and we just have to develop that further together with all other actors and in direct discussion also with partners. Policy dialogues should take place between the ministries responsible for the respective policy areas, representatives of the private sector and civil society, and of course farmers very intensely. Negotiations should focus on identifying pathways to repurpose support in ways that contribute to a healthy economy, healthy people, and healthy planet without compromising farmers' welfare. I think that is also something I think we didn't highlight so much today, but which also has to be taken into consideration very carefully. However, like any policy reform, repurposing agricultural support will affect the distribution of state resources among stakeholders and will likely create both winners and losers. And I think from David, from your presentation, we already learned quite a lot about that issue, and it is very important to take that into consideration. Environmentally and socially harmful policies persist as a consequence of asymmetries in political power and costs of collective action between that groups that gain from policy changes and those that lose from them. And therefore, navigating political economy challenges is key to political reform. To overcome the political economic challenge, governments need to establish structural adjustment measures and temporary compensation mechanisms that address the costs borne by the food systems actors as a result of policy reform. And again, this, I think, needs to be assessed very carefully from state to state. When it comes to collective policy action, institutional frameworks such as the German Commission on the Future of Agriculture and the Canadian Food Policy Advisory Council can be particularly important. I think those are good examples for multi-stakeholder commissions where everybody sits on the table and that assessment is taken quite intensively. These allow different economic, environmental, health and social perspectives to be brought to the table to identify challenges for the food system.
Thank you, Anka. I know it's really challenging for everybody to try and speak with in this such lively environment, let's just say, and really to the audience who is sticking with us throughout this. I'm turning now to you. I hope you've been saving up some tough questions for our panelists. Do we have a microphone? Maybe we can see if this one works. Question.
Hello.
Here, we'll come to you first, and then to this gentleman here. I might just take. Is there any more? I might take 3 questions. David, do you want to?
Thank you.
Why don't you sit up here
Hello.
in case there's any questions for David as well? Don't forget. Questions for David, and we can. If there's anyone else, let me know, and we can do one or two quick rounds.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. I come from the Philippines, and my question is, this is not really a question, but I want to hear your thoughts about it. Public subsidies is always a part of the problem in our case in the Philippines, but also equally challenging and equally challenging is the question of the land, because the land is not really owned by the farmers themselves, so they cannot control it, and the things or the plants that they planted in the land is not theirs too. It is not their control, and we cannot do repurposing in one country, or in the case of the Philippines, the farmers is being the land of the farmers and the agricultural land is being reclassified in another purpose. So how do you think, what could be the farmers' situation, and how could the farmers can get a just transition in that case? Thank you.
Hello, I'm Melle. I'm from the Netherlands, working in Egypt on agriculture. I have 2 questions. One, I hope it's a rhetorical question, and that is, if we as a society expect farmers to provide public services, public goods, like the environmental goods, food security and inclusiveness, shouldn't we as society pay farmers for those public services? And my second question is, if we agree with that, why are we now in this circle preaching to the converted, I hope, and not talking to the Bretton Woods institutions that are still stuck in a neoliberal orthodoxy, who are not seeing that? Why are we not talking to governments in the south that are providing the wrong incentives to farmers. Like here in Egypt, using chemical fertilizers is being subsidized, and not the knowledge, applicable knowledge for nature-based solutions. As a European, I'm very proud that our common agricultural policy is not, like in the past, distorting markets, but nowadays is much more working with markets to provide farmers incentives on sustainability. I hope we can do that well in Europe, and I hope we can learn from that.
Okay, great. So land tenure, land security, these also came up in the farmer consultations. They were saying, you know, it's not just about incremental change. There's some big fundamental things we also really need to focus on. And that was exactly, so I think the last recommendation is actually very well that. Don't forget about this really important issue. Who wants to reflect on that one? Maybe Ishmael, things that came out from the dialogue?
Thank you. I think they are just maybe addressing both speakers, both questions. I think there's I said earlier on that farmers love subsidies, but they love subsidies for different reasons. Some would love them so that they can sell them to get money. So if you are going to be changing that system, the value proposition for change to that person that got a subsidy to sell it has to be very compelling. And quite often, subsidies can be provided as a political instrument of patronage. So if it's going to take away that power from the politician, the value proposition to the politician to change has to be very compelling. So it's not going to be easy navigating through this. And the other point that is also fundamental is that subsidies are just a tiny proportion of the total financing of agriculture. And trying to really wanting to change the world through subsidies is really, maybe we are backing the wrong sort of tree. Yes, it's important to repurpose, but also when we are evaluating them, we need to understand that they were not set up to do the things that we want them to do now. So maybe let's not be too harsh in saying they are harmful to the environment, that is because they were not set up to deal with that. If they were set up to give handouts and people are happy about it, maybe they achieved the intentions for which they were intended. So I think the analytical framework of equity subsidies must be very clear, otherwise we are going to be making wrong conclusions and making decisions that might not be implementable in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to add something small on what she touched on repurposing subsidies. And from my understanding, there is no way you can even repurpose something that doesn't exist, especially Eastern Africa region where I'm from. I don't think we have subsidies. I don't think we have subsidies. What we have, maybe I can call it political handouts. These are driven by political ideologies, and you will always see them during times of elections. And in some cases, maybe some interventions to build back better, like the recent COVID pandemic. I know some countries waived some taxes on fertilizer and seed, and that was for a short time. For example, in Kenya, I think it did that for 3 months. In Uganda, it was giving out certified seed to farmers. But you can imagine a farmer would line up to receive seed, and at the end of the day, you receive half a kilo or 1 kilogram of seed. So what kind of impact does that have on the farmer? So I think for me, the discussion of repurposing subsidies is not really a topic of discussion for Africa as a continent, maybe save for a few countries in Africa. And this is why we are calling for more funding for subsidies, because farmers are interested in subsidies. Thank you.
Excellent point, Elizabeth. I think we should change repurposing and scaling investment in 1 minute, and then I'm going to move to our wrap-up.
Two quick things. Yes, I mean, repurposing is about that. You know, what do we want from agriculture? 50 years ago, it was just produce a lot of food to target even self-sufficiency. In India, in Europe, green revolution. Then some countries have said, okay, we are polluting our water, we should start to bring environmental dimension. And today we say, oh, we want also healthy diets. But all of this has a price. And let's be honest, we don't want to pay with the price of food, the true price of food, because poor people will never be able to afford. Already today we have 3 billion people that cannot afford a healthy diet. If we bring all the costs of these new things at the consumer level, that will make things worse. So that's why, yes, we need to have a new contract with farmers, and they have to be part of the discussion, because it should not come from the top, you know, asking farmers to make miracles without the right tools. Whole food system, I mean, it starts with farmers, but go beyond. And it's where the governance aspect of it, and I will conclude on that. So on one hand, let's be honest, yes, political land out. Most of the subsidy from Brussels to Durban have not been designed to empower farmers. And they don't like when farmers start to become too autonomous, you know, because there's a lot of things you guys and you don't need it. They don't like it. Every year you give something to get an. And that's what policymakers like and what we should not have. And yes, on land tenure, that's also very important for soil health. How you want farmers to take care of an asset if they don't own it?
Thanks, David. So this is pretty challenging stuff. We're getting that. This isn't going to happen overnight. This is tough going, and it's ongoing, and the work has started, and it has to continue. I really want to encourage people, if you haven't read it, to download the policy action agenda that was published at COP26 last year. It's still open, it's still relevant. It's got a really good set of steps that you can take to get started, and actions that governments can take, actions that others can take. To that second question about how do we get out, how do we convert the others who aren't in this room, I'm going to ask Martina Fleckenstein to step up and offer some sort of concluding remarks, because she's somebody who's doing a lot of thinking about the international advocacy on this topic as part of the working group on this issue. And so from WWF, Global Policy Director of the Food Practice at WWF International, over to you.
Yes, thank you. Yes, for me it's a very inspiring session here, and also it's very inspiring being here at the COP. And being here now, arrived on Sunday, and it's really the first climate conference where we have food in the pavilions, where we discuss about food. And this is amazing, and for me it's really a speeding up. We started at the UN Food Systems Summit. We had the COP26, where we really brought already some bits and pieces, and now we are here. We have about 300-400 events only tackling food, and I think this is already something where we have made a huge success. And having here a panel, which is government, which is private sector, which are the farmers, and we have the science here, and we have the UN entity with FAO. So we are on a very good way. And that's why I'm optimistic if we talk about the repurposing agenda, the repurposing of policies, and the repurposing at the end also of harmful subsidies. It doesn't mean that we want to stop subsidies. It's more the redirection, the subsidies in the right direction. And just have some reflection on the COP here. Tomorrow there is the Food Day. It's the first time that food and agriculture are in the official presidency program, so don't underestimate this. Yeah, we have tomorrow the FAST initiative, which is the Food and Agriculture Sustainable Transformation Initiative. And before I have some more remarks, we also have a dream, and I'm with WWF International, and what we really want to see is to mention food systems in the cover discussion, so in the outcome decision of this COP, so everybody who has influence on this, please lobby and talk to the negotiators, talk to those people in the room to bring this in the cover decision. Yeah, and let me a little bit more specific. I think what is important, what we heard from everybody of the speakers here, is that we have to break down the transformation agenda at national and also at regional level. Transformation will not happen at a global level, and we will not achieve the SDGs if we don't go on the ground and we are working there with a partner. And this is also critical for the repurposing agenda. What is also important is that this repurposing agenda involves all stakeholders. So like we are here with different groups of stakeholders, this had to be replicated at national level. And the repurposing agri-food must also be developed in this integrative and inclusive multi-stakeholder process. And I think women will play a very, very important role at that point. More than 50% farmers are women, and we have to strengthen women power and talk to what you mentioned. We need land rights. Yeah, we need land rights. We have to take on the land tenure right, which also has to do with repurposing agendas. And maybe also we had to get out our bubbles. We always are here. So we had the land conference, we have the climate conference, and in 4 weeks we have the biodiversity conference. So we really have to transform and bring food in the land, in the climate, and in the biodiversity conference, and we have to connecting the dots. And also what is important, we need financial support. An analysis done by the Global Alliance for Future of Food said that from the, that for the NDCs, 93% of the NDCs are mentioning food measures, which is also a success now, but less than 3% of the climate funding finance is earmarked for food systems. So you see there is still a lot of things to do for us if we want to go on this food systems transformation, and there is not one food system. And let me close, looking at the COP28, 12 months ahead now. What do we want to see there? And it's one of the questions we always get, what would you see as an outcome of this COP and of the net COP? I think we have time to strengthen our food system. First of all, bring food system in the global biodiversity framework, which will be decided in 4 weeks. There are target 10, target 16, target 18, very closely connected to food system. Secondly, we really need to take care that the commitments in the NDCs are going to be implemented and not just stay in a commitment level. And we all could take actions, and I would like to encourage you to participate in the other events this week, to carry on, and hopefully to see you in one of the other global conferences, but also strengthen implementation on the ground, and to carry all this energy which we have here on food system transformation over the next 12 months and longer. Thank you.
Thanks, Martina. And thank you to all of our speakers and panelists for this great session. I'm sure there's so much that we could talk to all of you about and get insights from you. If there's issues that we've discussed today that you're really interested in, if it's the global advocacy or if it's work that's happening in country, it's case studies, it's data, it's evidence, please do get in touch with us. As I said, we have a multi-stakeholder working group, people who are working on this topic, who want to work together collaboratively, find out more what's going on, how can we work more effectively together. So please do come and reach out and contact us if you'd like to learn more about that. Please do go to our website and see our recent publications. I just want to thank the Food Systems Economic Commission and IFPRI for working with the Just Rule Transition in organizing this event. I want to thank our hosts at the Food Systems Pavilion. They've been amazing, so good to work with. I know the technology is challenging at times, but they are doing their level best to make this work every single day, and it's really in a fairly challenging environment. So thank you to them. She's not here, but I want to actually give a shout out to Vita, who's the person who's keeping this whole food system pavilion going. I can't believe the woman, every time I see her, she's smiling and looks zen, and I can't believe how much she's done to make all of this happen here at the Food Systems Pavilion. So a huge shout out to her, and also a shout out to the JRT team, Sare, Holly, who can't be with us today, Liz, Christian, many others. So thank you for all the work that goes on behind the scenes. Alehu, who's just joined, who's absolutely brilliant as well. So thank you for your sustained commitment to this session. It's a really important and challenging topic, and please keep going out there, talking about it, learning more, and seeing what we can do together to shift the dial on this issue in an ambitious way. Good afternoon to you all.